people that you have humiliated and disrespected, you owe them respect.
Correct.
You owe people who have helped you, you owe them gratitude. You owe people whom you have offended, you owe them an apology.
Welcome to Dreams Made Possible podcast, where we share life 101 conversations for a great life. I'm your host, Botaki Hlalele, a life coach on a mission to cultivate personal mastery and self-worth in others. In this podcast, we conversate with personal development practitioners, leaders from across different walks of life who have left indelible mark on others, and ordinary folk who have beat the odds to be where they are. Before we dive deep into this conversation, please click on the link below and subscribe so that we can build a community of dreamers. Our guest today is Nene Molefi. Nene Molefi is the founder and CEO of Mandate Molefi Consultancy. This is a consultancy that spans over 2 decades, focusing on whole system change, culture transformation, values-driven leadership, diversity, equity, and inclusion. She's a renowned international speaker who has shared stages with different experts on diversity in countries like Zambia, Namibia, the USA, and Brazil. She also participates by contributing her knowledge as a guest speaker at Duke University CE in South Africa, as well as being a guest lecturer at Colorado University in Denver. She is the author of the book, A Journey of Diversity and Inclusion in South Africa, Guidelines for Leading Inclusively. Let's welcome Nene Molefi to the podcast today. Welcome, Nene, to today's episode. How are you feeling?
Thank you, Botaki. I'm feeling awesome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You know, the purpose about this podcast is to share Life 101 conversations.
Yes.
And the reason I'm saying Life 101, for me, I think we sometimes create so much complexity around this subject. And there are certain basic things that we can learn and take away and incorporate into our lives. But on this podcast, what we always say is that we start with the foundation. We say you don't have to put bricks on the surface, and then after that you dig below and try to build a foundation, because that house is going to crumble.
Yeah.
So the foundation is, who is Nene Molefi? Where do you come from? Which type of family did you grow in? What was the feeling like in that family?
Yeah, Nene Molefi was born and bred in Soweto, Dube. I'm a girl in the middle, the second child. I've got an older brother and a younger brother, and I've got 3 children.
Wow.
I've got my daughter and my son, and then my nephew, who I call my child as well. So I live with my daughter has just moved out, and in Soweto, I really grew up in a community that many people of my age will really resonate with. I grew up in a community where, on our street in Soweto, we would speak all the 9 languages. South Africa is 11 languages.
And that's the richness, I guess.
There. So all the 9 African languages would be represented in Soweto. And that is why we end up speaking a fruit salad of English. Because next door they speak Sizulu, the other house they speak isiXhosa, and then Sepedi there. And we all just mix and get to understand and learn. And those years, there was much more of a community. There was just camaraderie. You'd go next door and just borrow some tomato or salt, and they look at me like, what? How can you do that? And I said, that's how we used to live. And of course, it's during those times where the 1976 uprising, and I educate people to not call it the 1976 riots. The students were not rioting, because a riot gives an impression that there's something wrong you were doing.
Yes.
You are rioting, you're just out of control. So these were uprisings, okay?
I like that because I never even thought of it that way. Thanks for that.
There was something wrong that we were standing up against. So it was uprising against an injustice. And so it was also during those times. So when I look at, we had our struggles those years. Yes, the youth now have their own struggle, which is different. When I look at Fees Must Fall, that's their struggle. Not that we are not interested, but that's their struggle. We had our struggle every year. Every generation has its own struggle. So I really grew up in a community that I loved a lot. And of course, then later I got to work and I live now in what we call the suburbs. It's still my country. I can live anywhere. So that's where I live now.
No, that's very, very awesome. I would just like to take you back again to your community, and part of that community also being your family, because that's where the nuclear starts, and then the bigger community. So when you were growing up, you have mentioned some examples of the political space at the time. Who would have influenced Nene to be who they are? Maybe one or two people that you can share with us.
Yeah. You see, I always say, I sometimes read stories and I see people say, oh, my parent was an activist. It's like everybody's parent was an activist. Mine were not.
Yes.
I'm not lying. My parents were not activists. They were focusing on go to school. I remember there were times when we were writing, I was in Standard 3 in 1976, we were writing some, supposed to write exams and we couldn't go to school. And my mother used to say, let's find a way so that you go write exams. And I'm not, there's nothing wrong with, she was just like that. I don't think every single parent was an activist, but we lived in a system that was like that, right? She influenced me more by the narratives at home. Like she would say, I remember very clearly, you have to be a social worker. Because at the time, social workers had cars. For her, she was like, you need to have your own car. It's so beautiful when a young woman has a car. So you need to be a social worker. So there was never any option to not have a degree. Just the narrative at home. There was never an option to not have a degree. Because the goal, it's so important what we discuss at home, during dinners, what we discuss with our children. Because the goal was always, there's no way you'll be a social worker, So I knew, because my mother said that, I knew that after matric, I have to go to university and then be a social worker and then get a car and then whatever it is that I'll do. So that used to be the most, when I think back, I say families, please let's be careful about the conversations we have at home. The conversations about you can be that. You can aim for that because it puts a vision in a child. It doesn't matter how young they are, because that for me, I ended up being a social worker long after my mother passed away. Later I changed, of course, into the area of leadership. But I think she was so instrumental. And she was just saying, without education, you are nothing. Focus on education first. And I treasure, I value that. And I think we should all do that with our children.
I like the example that you said. You said for us in terms of your mother encouraging you to say study and then own your own car. And because when I read your book, I see this 40-year-old woman who in 1975 buys a Ford Capri. And I then says, wow, how many women would drive, black women for that matter, drive a Ford Capri at that time? At that time, I was just 1 year old. So
she was driving a sports car, a red Ford Capri, and along our street, go to be like, what? First of all, at her age, there were not as many women with driver's license. Forget about a car, just having a driver's license. So,
but sorry to interject, but was it about having a driver's license, or was women at that time even allowed to have a driver's license?
I think she did go. She failed 7 times. It was so difficult. She failed 7 times because those traffic officers at the time were like, what? But she persisted. She persisted. On this 8th time, she got her, how many people would have given up, right? And say, can I just bribe for this thing? So on the 8th attempt, she got her driver's license. And she got a car. And she owned my mother always owned her business. She was selling clothes. She was an entrepreneur. And she always taught me that try and work for yourself later in life. So for me, it was like, be a social worker, aim then, and then later in life, look at what you can do for yourself. So, so of course, I followed exactly that. I became a social worker. I now own my business.
Yes.
So I look back and I said, the things that parents say, the prayers that the parents pray, also get answered long after they're gone.
Correct,
We mustn't forget that.
Mustn't take that for life.
Because part of what has shaped me, for me as well, that I never want to forget, is that you must always have what centers you. So for me, God centers me.
Wow,
I am
wow.
so unapologetic about that. I am centered by God. There is no way you'll succeed on this earth when you think, I can do it, I'm clever. I don't know how many books I can read. I will never be able to reach the level that I've reached just on my own.
Yes.
Nobody makes it through life on their own.
Correct.
No
correct,
one.
Yes.
Like your question, that who do I look up to? Of course, it cannot be only one person.
Yes.
My mother was amongst in the foundation stage. Later in life, you get to meet people and you get to be influenced by different people as well.
If I may ask, your reference of God as your center, is it also something that comes from the family, or is it something as you were learning through life that
later? Let me tell you what happened. We would go to church when we were young, but it was just a tradition. You know, when you just go to church, you know, life says, on Sunday you go to church. That's just tradition. I had not connected with God personally myself. Later in life, when I grew up, I got to understand what does personal connection mean for myself. And I always say, even for my children, yes, when they were young, let's go to church, but you need to make your own connection. So that's, I think, when you become centered, it's when you've made that connection.
Without really laboring the point, because one of the things that I also say in my book and that I also preach to young people is that there must be that Damascus moment.
Yes.
So for you, what was that Damascus moment that says, this is the connection that I need to have?
Yeah. For me, there was, a serious defining moment in my life. I guess firstly was when my mother died. I was only 16 years old. And at 16, you're a girl, that's where you need all the support, and she was just not there, right? And during the time she was sick, I was praying. And I thought, oh, God will answer. And then she died. Do you know that can so destabilize you? It can make you turn away from God. So you need to have people around you who will hold your hand. I must say, during that time, there was a break. I wasn't as passionate about church and that, but I had people who were caring enough to hold my hand, to show me love. So God can send people in your life to be your angels, to be His representatives, to carry you through difficulties, so that when you get to that point of having your own connection with God, you look back and say, had it not been for God, I wouldn't have been here.
I really, really like what you unpack, because one of the things, like I say, my mission really is to cultivate personal mastery in people. But what I like about what you say is it's easy for us to always say, what is it that we do, before we can even say who we are. And understanding that part for me is very, understanding the woman, if I may put that way, behind diversity and inclusion is very, very critical. Now let's move on. You mentioned a very interesting thing for me, that your mother encouraged you to study and you became the social worker. But there's a very interesting story that I would like you to unpack for us. When you were at varsity, you had this assignment that you had to do. And there was this lady, Kathy, that you met at university, who happened to be a white girl.
I'm so impressed. You read my book.
So you have this assignment. And I would like you to unpack that example of you having to set appointments, because probably that's one of the challenges that even today most people are coming across.
Are still going through that. You know, when I talk about the concept of rank, power, privilege, systemic and structural barriers to advancement, people must never take for granted the difficulties that marginalized groups go through. And when I say marginalized groups, in every society, I work all around the world.
Yes.
So in every society, marginalized groups are different.
Yes.
So in South Africa, you talk about Black people, you talk about women, LGBTQ are different communities that are not necessarily always up there. So when we can never underestimate the difficulties that they have. So we had this assignment, and I was doing my honors at UCT. I have my classmate, Kathy, changed name, of course, for purpose of the book. So, and we have this assignment because we're doing honors in social work. We had to go and do a community study. So you have to choose a community to study thoroughly. So I was staying at that time with my aunt in Langa Township, but I said, let me choose something closer to my university. So I chose Woodstock to say I will do a community study of Woodstock. And of course, she chose where she lived. And then as we were going, and they gave us 3 months, I was so excited. Assignment of 3 months, that's a long time. So we were supposed to interview significant figures in the community. You had to interview the oldest teacher. You had to interview a bank manager. You had to interview traffic officer, police commissioner, hospital superintendent, different people. So it was a long list. The oldest shop owner, the youngest this or that, the gay couple, so you really had to know that community. So I chose Woodstock, and you had to make appointments, of course, to go and see the people you want to interview. So your first part of making those appointments, but for me, I totally underestimated the fact that just setting those appointments would be an issue itself. So imagine I'm from Soweto, I'm picking up a phone, hi, my name is Nene Molefi, I'm from UCT student, making this, as you are still trying to speak with your Soweto English. It's like, what? Most of those institutions were headed by white people. So while you are still trying to say, hi, I'm this, what do you want? I'd like to come and see a police commissioner. What for? But others, boom, they drop the phone. Even before you finish I struggled. So along the way into the assignment, I asked my friend to say, hey, how are you doing with my assignment? I nearly fell down. She said, I'm almost binding. I said, almost binding.
Another time you don't even sing of it.
As in binding, as in finishing. Now I'm struggling to get the appointment. And she said, yeah. And this is what I want to always share with people. She said this, she wasn't intending to hurt me. She was talking her truth. She said, no, my dad's PA made a few appointments. Just ask your dad to call around, whatever. First of all, my dad worked as a messenger in one of these big organizations. He would never dare pick up a phone. He would go through his own discrimination anyway. But my friend was talking to me from her own worldview. And her worldview was so different from mine. Now, we left with a very short period of time to submit now. I've lost the whole 6 weeks of trying to do this. Now, the time that I'm left, I must still set up appointments. I must still go see them. I must still write what they say. I must still type. I must still bind. You can see all of that's left. So, eventually I spoke to one of my supervisors because I was doing honors. So at Woodstock Hospital, my social work supervisor, I just happened to share my frustration. And she said, but why didn't you tell me? And she just picked up the phone. She did a few calls. There were still some no-shows, but it helped me so much. But remember, I was already late. So I had to put everything together. So by the time we finished, my friend gets the 80s and A, I get around the 50s. Now, this is what I want people to look at. When we talk about systemic barriers, the inequalities, that we must never miss to note that. If you look at that whole time, I did my best, okay? I didn't even want to be spoon-fed. I did my best to do my assignment. But because of whatever that happens that people don't see, let me tell you what people would look at. That you got 50s and she got 80, whatever. They would say, you were both at UCT. You both have access to the same library. All that is true. Ne? You have access to the same lecturer. It's true. I get it. All of those things are true. Yes. But what people don't see, that you have to face, that I don't have to face, that's what we want people. When we talk about equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, we say never miss the other things that are not obviously visible to you. So, because people who see, let's say we were going for a job and they're saying we want the best students. Who will be the best student? The one who got an A. Was I lazy? No. But does anybody care to listen to my story? That's an excuse. I guess people might think that's an excuse. So that is why this journey of educating people about diversity, equity, and inclusion is so important in my heart, because I went through that. Many people still go through that.
Yes. Okay. So maybe just to clarify your last point about this being something in your heart. You spoke about your mother, you growing up during the political sphere, and now this example at UCT, and maybe in many other examples. Would that have been the reason why you decided to venture into the whole thing of diversity? Because there were so many, you could have continued to be a social worker.
Yeah.
But why then? Why this diversity?
I know, people like putting stories that, this thing made me do this. No, it wasn't.
Okay.
I was a social worker. And then after that, while in social work, I got a job I was the first black social worker at Red Cross Hospital, right?
In Cape Town.
In Cape Town. Yes. Can I, just 1 minute, can I also tell you another thing that we were social workers. I was the only black social worker at the time. A lot of people were mistaking me for a translator, because this black woman who's walking with others. So, and we were allocated wards, right, as social workers. Now mine was the Benz unit and all that, a few wards that each of us as social workers had. But now we call to all these other different wards because, hey, there's a patient who doesn't understand English. Come and explain. And then I'll do it thinking I'm helping, until my supervisor said, who really, I think her name was Yvonne, my namesake, who really thinks I think she was progressive. She said, no, you are a social worker just like all the other white, and she was white, Africans. She said, like all these other white social workers that I have employed, there is no way that this hospital is going to use you as an interpreter. They must employ an interpreter. You have your profession, because the minute you are confusing your role now with being an interpreter and a social, who's going to take you seriously as a social worker? So anyway, that was just by the way to say also that's what you have to go through, you know. And so after that, I got a job at ESCOM. I applied, there were some vacancies for industrial social work, now social work in the corporate world. So I joined ESCOM and I worked there, had its own, it has its own things. But while I was there was an opportunity to then change the field, to move into Megawatt Park, and I moved into the field that I'm in of employment equity and HR. I moved into HR, but focusing specifically in the area of employment equity. That's where my interest started. And then my boss, may his soul rest in peace, Bongani Kumalo, sent me to, there was an exchange program in the USA. And that department was specializing in diversity and inclusion. That's where my interest actually now got.
Wow. So thanks. Let's change tune and really get in the work of diversity. And on this podcast, we've got what we call dialogue, the day in the life of. So you have run your company for almost 24 years now. How do you pack up your day? What happens when you start your day focusing on this work around diversity, equity, and inclusion?
First of all, I'm really encouraging those people either who are starting their businesses or in the beginning stages of their businesses, get the basics right. Get the basics right. If you want to run a business that's legitimate, a business that will be taken seriously, ensure that you've got tax clearances, ensure that those things would, when you show up in front of clients, they will see that you're serious. So I just wanted to say, please let's take care of that, because we tend to think, as long as I'm just looking at a contract, I've got a contract, I'm looking at, get the basics right. And it takes a while to get the basics right. Do you have UIF, workmen's compensation? All those things have to be in place. So, so when I wake up, my day, how does my day look like? And because I've existed for 24 years, I no longer, and I call it totally God's grace. I do not market a lot. I get referred by my previous clients.
Yes.
I get referred a lot by the work that I did. So your work must speak for itself in such a way that when a CEO meets another CEO, said, hey, I did work with Nene Molefi or Nene Molefi, let me refer you. So these days, when I wake up, because I've also employed staff to take care of different aspects of the admin part of my work, and then we just line up our staff. I allocate consultants. You have to get consultants that, because you can't do it all. Hey? Yes. On any given moment, I have more than 20 clients running simultaneously. So there is no way I can show up to all of them.
Yes.
So you need to ensure that your role as the owner, as the CEO, is to surround yourself with equipped people, surround yourself with consultants that will carry your brand well, that will deliver what the client wants. That's the only thing that will make you survive for 20 or more years.
So, viewers at home, I think for me, what is important out of what Nene has said is that, in my own ways, that you need to be able to do small things so that you can be trusted with bigger things. The challenge with most of us sometimes is that we want to already start with great things before we can even be trusted with smaller things. And about putting the basics in place, I think what she's saying is that at the beginning, let's not take what we do very lightly, but let's put the basics in place and not take things for chance. And then in that way, we will see us growing gradually to become the bigger people that we are envisaging to become. Nene, let's go into your work now, diversity and inclusion. 29 years into democracy or so, if I'm getting my numbers right. How have we shifted? Or what are those things that corporates are still battling with, if any? And what are those things that they have moved to embrace in this journey of diversity?
I think I see movement, right? Often you hear people saying, this thing called diversity doesn't work. First of all, I do not want to enter a journey with a defeatist mentality.
Yes.
If I say something doesn't work, why am I doing it? Why am I doing it for so many years? I'm not just here to collect checks and things. So I have seen movement, and this is where I've seen movement. Years ago, we used to talk about just diversity management, and what that used to look like was that the different cultures, that black people greet you this way,
that you don't look people in the eyes.
Look at people in the eyes. You look down. Those used to be what we call the cultural diversity training. We have moved way beyond that. And it's not about pigeonholing to say this is how black, because then you are reinforcing stereotypes. Shaman people do this. Tonga speaking people do this and this. It's putting people back into stereotypes. So we have moved from there. And then we got into a phase where people thought diversity and inclusion was just about numbers. It's just about employment equity. It's just, so that is why there are different terms. Employment equity is looking at how can you create equitable to ensure that the equitable representation of diverse people in your organization. That's not diversity. One of the areas diversity is ensuring that if you have a department that only has white people, you have to say, how do I make it diverse? How do I recruit people of different genders, of different colors? You are creating the diversity, but the work doesn't stop there. You can be as diverse as the rainbow, and people can still feel not included. So that is why beyond that, you have to say, then how do I create a culture where everybody feels included? So where I'm seeing the shift is people realizing that this work is much more richer. This work is not just about counting numbers. This work requires resilience, commitment, and dedication of leaders.
So let me just ask a question on, for example, you mentioning white males, Prophet. And this unit has got only white males, or if you like, only black males, and they are delivering the results. Is there anything wrong with that?
It can never be optimal. First of all, optics matter because remember that as South Africa, corporates don't exist, in a vacuum.
Yes.
They have what you call social and ethics committees in their boards and all that, and they need to show the extent to which they have to demonstrate diversity. So first of all, they have to do that, right? And over and above doing that, the other thing that's important is that there was a study that was conducted that if you have a homogeneous group and have a diverse group, and you take the homogeneous team and you give a homogeneous team, let's say white males who've worked together for 20 years or so, and you take a diverse team, that people who've recently been put together, you give both teams an assignment.
Okay.
In the beginning, the homogeneous team is going to perform the best. They will outperform a diverse team. You know why? Because you don't have to be sussing each other. Does he know? Actually, you've worked together for long. You know each other. I know that Botaki can deliver on this. So I don't have to be checking to say, does he really know what? A diverse team is that if this team of white males only, you are now going to add 2 women. Let's say you add 2 women. You add 3 black people. You add 1 person with disabilities. They will bring different thinking. They will bring their own lived experience. They live, some of them live in different suburbs than these ones live, right? They bring a culture of the way their lived experience is different. So that is going to destabilize what you would have called the equilibrium that you have before. So it takes longer to get to the assignment because I'm not sure if you know who says you know it. Because why should you be leading? We're used to this one leading. So it takes longer, okay? Because we talk about the teams going through norming, storming, performing. So that is why it can never be optimal. But those studies show that over time, a diverse team outperforms a homogeneous team. Wow. The thing is, people don't want to wait for the overtime. They want immediate delivery. But your immediate delivery will be short-lived because after a while it plateaus. Homogeneous teams' performance plateaus because you can't outperform what you know. Whereas when you bring other people with newer ideas, more creative ideas, then you are able to do better.
And I would also believe that delaying to bring that change also impacts on the inevitable. Because it will ultimately, if you are deliberate about it, then you will start working on getting better results because of building a diversity. Now, you have mentioned changes that have happened, the movements from the mannerisms and other stuff that we were taught. So what are the challenges that we are still battling with from your experience?
Challenge of resistance. You still find resistance. You still find fear. You still find, I always say there are 2 extremes. There's lack and loss, right? There are those who are, have you ever found I find in organizations, let's say you're saying that 30% of senior management needs to be black people or women or whatever, and then suddenly the fear of the 70%, and I challenge people to say, all what the targets are saying is that you are saying 30%. Out of 100%, let's say that is white male. You are saying 30% needs to be women or black people. And then if you get the people complaining, you are saying, how do you complain when we are saying 70% will still be you? And the 30%, how must they feel? So for me, I find that the fear, I call it unreasonable fear because we have a whole community who also feels that we are not represented. So I find the challenge is there. I also find that the challenge is in the concept that I call psychological safety. That, in the last 5 years, especially Harvard Business Review, has churned out a lot of articles around psychological safety, creating an atmosphere, an environment where people can express themselves, can say what they want to say. They can point out challenges in the organization, because what's the use of working as a team if one team member is not pulling their socks and I'm just trying to create a making nice culture because I want to keep to my lane. I don't want to challenge, or I don't want to challenge my leader. So I find that we need to equip leaders to strengthen their muscle with regards to creating a culture of psychological safety. Why that is important when you're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, because this can be an emotive topic.
Yeah.
So if it's not conducted, if the facilitation and the dialogue are not conducted in a safe environment, then that's very risky.
Okay. So it takes a dialogue, it takes facilitation. Does it take classroom teaching?
Yes.
Okay.
As to what is psychological safety and what it is not.
Okay.
Because psychological safety doesn't mean that like everybody does what they want, and you don't want suddenly to have a culture of mean-spirited personal attacks.
Yes.
You want robust engagement, but you want that to be done in a safe space.
Wow.
Yeah.
Then the other thing that I have seen personally as a challenge, and maybe you can unpack that for us, it's like even I used the example of conflict. There are those people who are averse to conflict. They would rather always play peace. But there are also other people who say, hey, we have been doing this forever. Aren't we coming to an end? We have been talking about diversity for a long time. And I heard in one of your lectures talking about transformation fatigue. Can you just unpack what that means for us?
Yes. Transformation fatigue is that you find a group of people, especially women and Black people, who say, not again. You are coming back again to ask for my view around how do I find the culture. You did that last year and nothing happened. I'm tired. I've been talking about this for the past 7 years, whatever. And I fully understand transformation fatigue, especially if there's no willingness on the part of the leadership to do something about the issues that people have raised. However, I also say to people that to throw in the towel and feel that I'm tired, I'm not doing anything, it's not going to change. It's the same as if you take the concept of leadership development. How long has leadership development gone through? So if you say we've been doing this for the past 20 years, so I'm not doing it anymore. So, I don't think you ever get to a point with inclusion to say, I'm done, now we are fully okay. Same with leadership development.
Correct,
you never get to a point where you say, now I'm fully developed. So I think if we can reframe the way we look at it.
So long as human beings exist, we'll deal with the subject of diversity.
You can do a full diversity workshop with your whole team, and next year you get 3 new people, and things you have to be redoing that. And you also, work on diversity evolves. You also have to update what you're doing to, up level the training itself.
You might have answered my next question, but I would just like us to get crisp on it. When diversity started in the South African context, the focus by corporates, there was an element where we even had programs like Women in Leadership. And I saw that you have also not long ago launched one of the programs with Facet. My question is, what is the relevance of doing specific programs for specific employee cohorts as far as diversity is concerned?
Well, the program with Facet is launched by the International Women's Forum South Africa. I'm a member of WIWFSA, and they are driving the Facet together with Duke.
Yes.
And I feel it's very important to still have programs that are aimed at particular groups. There is nothing wrong with having a program that says we want to empower women, because for years women have been ignored. So empowering women will continue and should continue, as long as we know during that empowerment you are not creating the other extreme. You're not empowering women to the point that men will be totally, like young boys, will be totally left out of the picture. So I am fully for programs that are geared, because there are certain things that women face as challenges that men don't face. So in that classroom, you are able to focus on those things.
Great. Now, looking at the other groups, like your LGBTI groups, without mentioning companies, there are only 2 companies that, from my perspective, that I worked for, that I knew embraced LGBTQI. Forums were formed, even from a budget, there would be sponsorship towards the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender group of employees. In your experience, how are companies evolving to give space to the LGBTI community in corporates?
Firstly, if I look at the global space I operate in, as we know that every country has its pain points, right?
Yes.
South Africa, in Africa as a continent, South Africa was one of in the forefront of ensuring that the constitution covers issues of homosexuality, LGBTQI. What's written in the constitution, however, doesn't mean that's what people live, because we can have it in our constitution, but the practices, the way, the attitudes of people is the work that needs to be done. Okay, so I find that a lot of companies, if I just talk South Africa, that companies are really recognizing that this is the one area we cannot ignore, especially if you look at things like gender identity. Really, I'm sure most recently you picked up people saying, oh, what about pronouns? What about gender neutral toilets? What about that? And I say this topic is much bigger than just bathrooms, but those are equally important. But you need to understand that it's a journey that people need to understand. We need to understand that what is not appropriate to say, what is appropriate to say. And along the way, people will make mistakes. People are still learning. So I'm finding that a number of organizations are truly realizing that we cannot sit back anymore. And they are all trying their different ways of putting together strategies for LGBTQI.
Oh, great. Yeah. So before we get into, as we get closer to wrapping up this conversation, before we get into the work that you do globally, I would just like to ask another question. We have spoken so much about corporates. Does it matter for a man on the street, a woman on the street, to understand the concept of diversity?
Of course, it matters. I do a lot of work also in schools, especially in private schools. Because this is the one area, again, just picture any private school that you know with a minority black students, and the teachers mainly white. And again, the issue in the education space, the issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion is important. It's not only in corporates. And actually, the earlier we start with this work, the better. Neuro studies show us that at 6 years old, implicit attitudes are already formed in a child. All other experiences are filtered through that. So we need to ensure that we catch this them when they are young. We start communicating this message. The work has to start at home. When you hear your little boy saying something about a girl, don't wait for next week. Don't laugh with them. Call them and correct them to say, what did you just say about the girl? You cannot say that. And then you tell them, not in a shouting way, you tell them that this is why it's wrong to say this. We need to do work at home first. So in the community, the work is important. At schools, at universities, the work is important, and in corporates as well.
All walks of life. It is very, very important.
In churches.
Even in one-on-one.
I have done in my church, in different churches. This is the work that needs to continue. Who says churches don't discriminate?
Correct.
Yeah.
Wow. No, that's so awesome. That is eye-opening.
Yeah.
Can you just walk us through, when you look at the global scale, I understand that you are a member of the Diversity Collegium, which is a think tank of diversity specialists. What is it that you do, if you can share with us? And maybe I can ask two questions at the same time there. What is it that you do? And at the same time, how do you measure your impact as a Diversity Collegium?
Well, we started with the Diversity Collegium and then it morphed into the Center for Global Inclusion. So I am a co-author of what we call Global Diversity and Equity Benchmarks. The three of us who co-authored that worked with 112 global experts on diversity and inclusion around the world. So at an international level, we have got those benchmarks to say, when you want to say best practice on DI, what does best practice look like? So the whole document, it's available for free. It's our contribution to society. If you just get into the website of the Center for Global Inclusion, you can download it. As long as you sign up, there's a user agreement you need to sign. But other than that, it's freely available. So that's the work that you do globally. Other than that, I also have clients in different parts of the world where I do the same work. And the reason why it's important is that people know that in South Africa, we have really gone through, I mean, we've got 11 official languages,
yes.
and we went through the history that we went through. So there is value also in listening to South Africans, South African practitioners as well. So that is why some clients do invite us to say, and I speak in many international conferences that talk about the perspective that you know of diversity, equity, and inclusion from your country's, from your continent's perspective. And it doesn't mean that because I'm African, I can speak for the whole of Africa. No. But I do work in other parts of Africa as well. It's about understanding that what are the pain points in the different areas. In some of the African countries, not so much race, but ethnicity and gender or LGBTQI. So different countries have their
own challenges.
Yes, their own challenges, and we need to acknowledge the nuances, cultural nuances. Yeah.
Without a doubt, there's a lot that still needs to happen in the diverse space, and it will continue to happen in that way. But maybe before you leave, as we say here, we share Life 101 conversations for a greater life. And looking at how you grew up, your career challenges and opportunities up to where you are, when you look back and you talk to that young boy, young girl, the professional coming up in their career, a young father, a young mother, what is it that you can leave as a Life 101 lesson for them?
Yeah, I think the one fundamental thing is that whether you want to start a business or whether you are employed in a company, whether you are in the academic space or whatever, if there is one thing I hold dearly, is learn to be respectful. There is not respect as a professional. You know, have you ever seen somebody who is excellent, in so-called excellent in what they do, but the way they talk to people, they humiliate other people, or they just push their weight around. So for me, respect and integrity is what I say. If you want to go far in life, this is what, you know, I've just posted, in fact, on my Facebook thing to say, you often hear people say, me, I don't owe anybody anything. I just say it as it is. No. You owe people that you have humiliated and disrespected, you owe them respect. You owe people who have helped you, you owe them gratitude. You owe people whom you have offended, you owe them an apology. And as we have heard over and over again, an apology without changed behavior is manipulation and empty words. So if there's one thing I want to leave out there, is that can we, if all South Africans were to live with integrity, respecting each other and saying, what can I do to better myself? This can be a better world, regardless of what profession you're in.
So much potent to end on that note. And probably you are at home, you have heard that diversity and inclusion are subjects that will remain with us for the rest of our lives. As we evolve in one-on-one relationships, in corporates, even at national levels, this is a subject that will remain with us. It is up to us to learn more about it, do the best that we can to develop ourselves as individuals, so that when we join groups, we join them as a better people. And those groups should tend to become a better societies and a better countries, a better continent, only if we work on understanding each other, because we need each other on this journey of life. Thank you so much for watching this show today.